there was a village tucked between two hills where laughter never seemed to die. It bubbled from the fields at noon, spilled into courtyards during chores, and echoed even through the quiet of funerals. Outsiders called it joyful. A blessed place. But those who lived there knew its rhythm and its cruelty. Laughter in this village was not born from happiness. It grew from discomfort. It bloomed when someone cried. It howled when someone stumbled. And when someone suffered, the village roared. People said the laughter kept bad spirits away. That the gods loved humor and scorned weakness. That even children were taught, from the moment they could speak, to point at tears and giggle. That way, nothing would stick to them. Not sadness. Not misfortune. Not guilt. Emily had long learned not to cry in public. She lived in a leaning hut on the village edge, where the grass grew a little too dry and the birds never settled on the fence. Her grandmother, who once sang in the night markets and healed people with roots, now lay curled in a straw bed, bones sharp beneath her thin skin. Emily spent most of her days fetching herbs, boiling water, wiping sweat from the old woman's brow. Her voice had gone hoarse from whispering the same word to her grandmother every morning: please. Please wake up. Please stay. Please don't leave me yet. The villagers watched, sometimes. But never helped. They would nudge each other as Emily passed, muttering that she had her mother's eyes but her father's madness. They'd say it was no wonder her grandmother fell ill, with the kind of girl she had to live with. Some crossed the road when she approached. Others smiled politely, too politely. But no one ever came near her fence. At 17, Emily had grown used to solitude. Her only company was the forest wind and the strange voices she sometimes heard in her sleep. They weren't voices she recognized, not quite human, not entirely foreign. They whispered beneath her bed and hummed through the floorboards. She didn't tell anyone. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew what they'd say. She'd seen what happened to others who spoke of odd things. The last boy who claimed to see shadows dancing on water was beaten until he recanted, and then laughed at for years. Still, the voices lingered. They grew loudest at night. Especially on stormy evenings, when thunder cracked and the wind shrieked through the trees. That was when Emily sometimes woke screaming, heart pounding, eyes wet. Dreams of fire. Dreams of her grandmother being pulled into the dark by invisible hands. Dreams of mouths with no faces, repeating her name. And every time, without fail, her screams were met not with concern, but with chuckles. Snickers. Laughter through open windows. She heard them. She always heard them. Sometimes even applause. Ah, she's doing it again, someone would call. She could be an actress, another would jeer. Even the chief's sons, tall and broad-shouldered, would shout across the huts, "Emily, the siren strikes again." One night, after a particularly harsh dream, Emily had stepped outside to breathe. Her hands trembled. Her lips tasted like metal. She sat on the cold ground, head in her palms, rocking slowly. And from behind the fence, hidden by the shadows of a neem tree, came a burst of stifled giggling. Then a mocking imitation of her scream, stretched and high-pitched. She didn't move. She didn't shout back. She just stayed there, letting the night eat her silence. She had learned something crucial, more than herbs and prayers, more than surviving in a place that mistook cruelty for tradition. She had learned how to carry pain like a secret. She had learned how to listen to the quiet things that no one else could hear. In a village where tears were entertainment, and screams were the punchline of a joke, Emily knew she was alone. But deep within her, deeper than her bones, deeper than any name she had ever been called, something was listening. Something that didn't laugh. Something that waited. The wind came in strange that night, not wild, but heavy, like a held breath before something breaks. The air was thick with the scent of iron and smoke, though no fires burned. Clouds sagged low over the village roofs, and thunder crawled across the hills like a warning spoken too late. Emily woke with a jolt. Her mat was damp with sweat, her pulse racing against her chest like a drumbeat. But it wasn't a dream that pulled her from sleep this time, it was the silence. Her grandmother's coughing, always a steady, rasping rhythm in the night, was gone. The old woman's sleeping breath, weak but alive, had always been a comfort. Now, there was nothing. Emily called out, softly at first. Go? No answer. She lit a small lamp and turned to the bed. The blankets were crumpled, tossed aside, as though someone had left in a hurry. The door to the hut hung slightly open. Rain hadn't yet begun to fall, but the wind hissed through the gap like a whisper. Emily stepped outside barefoot, her lamp trembling in her hands. Her voice cracked the silence again. Go? Where are you? Her bare feet slapped against the wet earth as she searched the yard, then beyond the fence, into the tall grass. That's when she saw it. Just beyond the clearing, near the edge of the forest, something moved, not like an animal, not like a person. It slid. Dragged. A dark shape, thin and wrong, pulling something behind it. The bundle it dragged was slumped. Limp. Emily screamed. Help, she shouted, running toward the main square. Someone help me. She's gone. Something took her. Doors creaked. Windows opened. A few faces peered into the rain-slick night. Her cries cut through the wind, wild with fear. She pounded on doors, called names. But instead of alarm, laughter met her. She's doing it again, someone said from a nearby hut. Best one yet, another chimed, chuckling from behind a curtain. Emily turned, enraged. This isn't a joke. My grandmother, she's gone. Please. Voices hushed, but then a group of boys appeared from the alley near the central well. 6 of them, barefoot and shirtless, laughing like they'd heard a funny story in the dark. 2 were the chief's sons, Mandla and Bika, broad-shouldered, grinning, always first to turn cruelty into sport. Why the long face, Emily? Mandla asked, mock concern stretching his lips. Lose your pet ghost again? She's serious, man, one of the smaller boys said, uneasy. Emily pointed toward the trees. I saw something take her. It dragged her. Into the forest. Bika squinted toward the woods, then shrugged. All I see is a girl with messy hair and wild stories. I'm not lying. Emily's voice cracked. Something took her, please, I need help. She was there, by the roots. The boys glanced at each other. Someone snorted. Then they all started to walk. Let's go see the monster, Mandla said. Maybe it'll teach Emily some manners. They followed her, dragging their feet through the mud, kicking pebbles, laughing as thunder rolled above them. Emily ran ahead, breath ragged, lamp flickering. When they reached the clearing, the dragging marks were still faintly visible in the dirt, disappearing into the first wall of trees. The boys hesitated. See? Emily gasped. She was here. I swear it. Something took her. But the others only squinted. One of them shook his head. Looks like animal tracks. Or your imagination again, Mandla added. You should sell that scream. It'd make a fortune in the city. Emily turned on him. You think this is funny? My grandmother is gone. Her voice cracked with desperation. I don't care what you think. I know what I saw. Bika stepped closer, eyes gleaming. You know what I think? I think you just want attention. No one listens to you, so you make up stories. Cry about ghosts. Scream in the night. I saw her get dragged away, she cried again, her voice shrill with panic. You all heard me scream. You laughed. Why do you always laugh? Because you're hilarious, Mandla said. Like a puppet with a broken voice. Then he shoved her. She stumbled backward into the mud, the lamp flying from her hand and shattering. Her palms hit the earth hard. Her clothes soaked instantly. The boys stared down at her, still grinning. Go scream at the trees, Bika muttered. Maybe they'll believe you. One by one, they turned and walked away, voices fading with their laughter. Emily sat where she'd fallen, trembling. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, blurring the world around her. Her face, streaked with tears, tilted toward the forest. Somewhere beyond the trees, the darkness whispered again. Not with laughter, but with something deeper. The boys didn't hear it. They were already gone. But Emily did. And as the last footstep faded, the forest grew completely silent. Rain pressed down like a shroud, soaking Emily's skin and hair, filling her ears with its steady hiss. But beneath that sound, deeper than the storm, she heard something else, a low hum, pulsing through the earth. The kind of sound that didn't travel through air but through bones. She stood on the edge of the forest, eyes fixed on the darkness between the trees. Everyone in the village knew not to enter the forest at night. The elders called it cursed, and the children whispered about shadows with no shape. They said there was a place where the trees grew too close, too twisted, where the roots were hollow and the air stayed cold, even under the noon sun. They said the dead never stayed buried if they were placed too close to those trees. Emily stepped into the forest anyway. She moved slowly at first, her bare feet slipping on the wet ground, her fingers brushing rough trunks for balance. The deeper she went, the more the trees seemed to bend in toward her, as though watching. The wind died as she passed under the canopy. No birds sang here. Even the rain quieted, muffled by the tangled leaves above. Still, she kept going. She had no lantern, no torch. Only the faint memory of the dragging trail, now washed half away by the storm. Time unraveled in the forest. She couldn't tell if she'd walked for minutes or hours. Her arms were scraped, her throat raw from crying, but still she called out. "Go, go?" Her voice barely carried. Then the trees opened. A small clearing appeared suddenly, a perfect circle in the middle of the woods. At its center stood a single tree, taller than any Emily had seen, with a black, gnarled trunk and roots that spread out like the arms of something crawling. Its bark pulsed slightly, like it was breathing. Beneath its roots, there was a hollow dark enough to swallow the world. She stepped closer. This was the tree. The one they spoke of only in hushed warnings. The one children were told to fear. But Emily felt no fear. Only emptiness. And something else. Something just below her skin, like a memory that wasn't hers. She dropped to her knees before the roots and spoke, her voice breaking with every word. "Please. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. But I need her back. Please." The wind shifted. The tree creaked, but not from movement. It was a sound with shape, with weight. A sound that said something without words. Emily pressed her hands into the mud and wept. "I have nothing else. No one believes me. No one hears me. They laugh when I scream. They laugh when I beg." Silence. Then, from the hollow beneath the roots, something stirred. It didn't slither or growl. It spoke. Not in a voice, but in hundreds of them, layered, broken, male and female, young and old. Not in words, but in meanings. "We hear you." Emily jerked upright, eyes wide. Her breath caught. "Who?" "We were not born. We were given. Carved from silence. Fed with pain. They buried us beneath laughter. But we never forgot the sound." The roots shifted slightly, curling in toward the center. "You want them to hear your cry? Then give it to us. Give us your scream. We will make it theirs. Not as vengeance, but as remembrance." Emily trembled. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I don't want revenge," she whispered finally. "I want them to feel. Just once. To know what it's like not to be heard. Then give." Her chest rose and fell. She touched her throat, uncertain. "Your scream for their silence." Emily nodded. The roots surged forward, curling around her arms, her legs, her waist. Not tight, not painful. Like a parent cradling a child. Like earth reclaiming what was once taken. She opened her mouth and screamed. But this time, it wasn't heard. It was taken. The sound tore from her like a living thing, long and raw and filled with every memory of fear, of humiliation, of being mocked while begging for help. It poured from her like blood, like breath, like her soul had been cracked open. The tree absorbed it, the roots glowing faintly red. The scream went on, yet no creature stirred. No wind moved. And then, silence. When she woke, she was lying on the forest floor. Morning light filtered weakly through the canopy. Her body ached. Her throat burned. She sat up, dazed. Opened her mouth. Tried to speak. Nothing. Not a gasp. Not a whisper. Not even a breath. She touched her lips in horror, tried again. Still, nothing. The scream was gone. And yet, she felt no panic. Her heart beat slow and steady. The forest was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. The tree loomed behind her, still unsatisfied. Emily rose to her feet, barefoot and silent, and began to walk home. The pact had been made. When Emily returned to the village, soaked and silent, no one asked where she had been. She walked barefoot through the main path, clothes clinging to her skin, her eyes distant and unreadable. Mud covered her arms. Leaves tangled in her hair. But no one offered a cloth or a question. They had already decided what she was. Mad, the women whispered from their porches, fanning their cooking fires. Finally snapped. Probably been talking to ghosts again, muttered a merchant as he passed her. She needs a priest, someone said. Or a rope. Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. When the chief's sons passed her near the well, they stopped briefly. Mandla whistled low, flicking his fingers near her face as if to provoke a reaction. Gone quiet, little banshee, he said with a grin. Forest chew your tongue? Emily looked at him. Just looked. The grin faltered, just slightly. Bika nudged his brother and they walked on, laughing louder than they needed to. But the laughter wasn't the same. That week, the village changed in ways no one could explain. It began with the animals. The chickens stopped laying eggs. Goats became restless, kicking at their pens. Dogs refused to enter the village square, whining at the thresholds and backing away as if something invisible stood in their path. Birds flew in wide circles, never settling on rooftops anymore. Then came the wind. At first it was ordinary, just breeze drifting through open windows. But by the third night, the wind began to echo. It whistled through the rafters with a sound not unlike a scream held too long. People claimed it whispered names. Some heard their own. Some heard names they hadn't spoken in years. The healer swore she heard her mother's voice sobbing in the corner of her hut, a mother who had died 2 decades before. Villagers started shutting their windows, sealing gaps with cloth and clay. But the sound still came. Through walls. Through dreams. And the laughter changed. Where once it had been sharp and confident, cruel, yes, but bold, it now came stilted. Strained. Dry. The more they laughed, the more hollow it sounded, as if the air itself refused to carry it. Like each chuckle cost more than it gave. Some stopped laughing altogether, fearing what might follow. Emily remained silent. She did not weep. She did not speak. She sat by her grandmother's empty bed during the day, and at night, she walked the village paths barefoot, her shadow thin under the moonlight. She didn't knock on doors. She didn't look up. But wherever she passed, the wind stirred. Then came the dreams. The boys, the ones who had mocked her in the clearing, began to suffer. One by one, they woke screaming in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, clutching their chests. They claimed to hear Emily's scream, the exact sound, over and over again, in their ears as they slept. She was inside my head, said the youngest, eyes red with terror. Screaming. Not with words. Just breaking me. Another boy, shaking so violently he could barely stand, claimed he heard her voice under his bed, not screaming now, but laughing. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just endlessly. Mandla stopped coming outside. His father, the chief, swore it was just fever. But the villagers saw how his eyes darted to the corners of the room, how he flinched at the sound of wind. Bika began carrying charms around his neck, even the ones he used to mock. He refused to sleep indoors, claiming the walls whispered to him. He was found 3 nights in a row crouched beneath the same neem tree, staring toward Amelie's hut. The chief summoned the priest. The priest poured oils and ashes, chanted and prayed. But even he left quietly by dawn, refusing to touch Amelie or meet her gaze. She has no spirit, he said. No breath. Her voice is gone. By the 7th night, no one dared laugh anymore. And Amelie, the voiceless girl, sat in the dirt beside the old well, watching the moon rise above a village that had never listened, until now. It began slowly, like a forgotten ember flaring beneath ash. At first, it was just whispers, not gossip, but the kind that came with dread. People began to murmur that those who once laughed loudest were speaking to shadows now, or flinching at things no one else could see. Children were told not to point, not to ask questions, not to stare too long at the ones who began talking to themselves or screaming into the night air. The first to fall was Nono, the butcher's sister. She was known for her cackling laugh, the kind that rattled windows and stung pride. She once laughed so hard when Amelie fell in the river that she claimed her stomach ached for 2 days. Now, Nono sat in the middle of the path with her back turned to the sun, muttering nonsense about teeth in the dirt and eyes behind the trees. She hears the wind laughing, her mother whispered. She says it laughs just like she used to. Nono stopped eating. Her eyes glazed. She died after 4 days, not from sickness, but from exhaustion, as if her own mind had worn itself thin. Her body was buried in haste. The air around her grave buzzed with flies that no one could see. Then the healer began to tremble. At night, she said, the scream came in waves. Not Amelie's scream as they had heard it before, but something deeper, a version soaked in centuries, as though every silenced soul had added a note to it. She claimed the walls of her hut breathed with it, that her water pot whispered warnings. No herbs helped. No chants calmed her. On the 6th day, she tore cloth from her shelves and wrapped it tightly around her ears. When that failed, she took her bone knife and slit the cartilage at the edge of each ear, begging aloud for silence. Blood stained her robes. She screamed until her throat bled, not from pain, but from the sound she was trying to drown. They found her collapsed in her garden, clutching her head with blood-streaked fingers, laughing hoarsely as though something inside her had taken over. The chief refused to believe it at first. He declared it a wave of madness, the kind that sometimes passed through places with too much heat and not enough prayer. But that changed when his youngest son died. It happened in the early hours of the morning. The boy had complained the night before that his dreams were filled with sound, laughter and shrieking, layered over each other until he couldn't tell if he was awake or not. He had begged his father to sleep outside, away from the house, claiming that something in the roof whispered Amelie's name. They found him at dawn, sitting up in his sleeping mat with his eyes wide open and a grotesque grin carved across his face. His mouth was stretched unnaturally, the muscles locked in a final expression of mockery, or terror. The priest who examined him vomited behind the hut and refused to return. No wounds. No signs of poison. No explanation. Just that smile. That impossible, hideous smile. By then, people no longer whispered around Amelie. They crossed to the other side of the path when she approached. They shut their doors more quietly, as if afraid she might hear. Mothers pulled their children back by the arm when she passed, and no one, not even the boldest of the boys who had once mocked her, met her eyes. She walked among them with quiet footsteps, her face calm, her presence ghostly. She still could not speak, but she no longer tried. Wherever she stood, the air felt thinner. Like something else had arrived with her. Those who had once chuckled when she screamed now dreamed of teeth falling from their mouths and laughter echoing through empty rooms. They dreamt of being buried alive under the sound of their own voices, warped and returned to them by something that did not forget. More fell sick. Some lost their hearing altogether. Others clawed at their throats in their sleep, as if trying to silence the screams coming from within. It was no longer a curse they feared. It was memory. The memory of what they had done. And of the girl who had screamed for help while they had laughed, now walking quietly among their graves, with silence for a voice and judgment in her steps. The village elders gathered in the chief's courtyard, their faces drawn and eyes rimmed with sleepless red. Too many people had fallen ill. Too many were whispering of ghosts and curses, of laughter that curdled into cries by night. The chief, his shoulders hunched with grief, demanded a solution, something to stop the rot spreading through their homes, their minds. "We must bring the old ways back," said one elder. "Joy must be louder than fear." "A celebration," the chief agreed. "We will remind the spirits that we are not afraid. We will drown the silence in drums and song." So, they planned a festival. The villagers were ordered to clean their homes, hang bright cloth from their doorways, and prepare meals rich with spice. Drums were placed in the square, incense piled in clay bowls, fires built high and wide to burn through the night. Everyone was commanded to attend, no one was allowed to hide behind locked doors or pull blankets over their heads. "The gods need to hear us laugh," said the chief. "Even if they must be forced." By dusk, the square shimmered with firelight. Colors danced in the smoke. Children painted their faces, and women draped themselves in beads that clacked like bones when they moved. The drummers lined up near the well, their hands poised over the taut skin of their instruments. The air was heavy with the scent of burning resin and sweat. But the laughter was thin. Nervous. Forced. No one looked one another in the eye for too long. No one wanted to speak of the boy who had died with that crooked smile or the healer who now sat mute in her blood-streaked hut, ears bandaged tight. And still, they danced. They danced because they were told to. Because they had nothing left to try. Because silence was beginning to feel like death. As the first rhythms echoed through the air, some villagers moved with eager feet, spinning wildly, their movements desperate. Others moved stiffly, like puppets. Faces gleamed with paint and sweat. Feet stomped in unison. Bells jingled from ankles and wrists. The night pulsed with effort. Then, from the edge of the crowd, Amelie appeared. She wore her grandmother's shawl, a faded indigo wrap lined with silver thread. It was too large for her shoulders, but she held it with a dignity that made it seem like a royal mantle. Her hair was braided down her back, her feet bare and caked with earth. No one had seen her enter. She simply was, standing in the circle of firelight like a statue risen from the dark. People froze when they noticed her. Even the drumming stuttered. But Amelie did not speak. She never did. She stepped slowly into the square, weaving between the dancers. The fabric of her shawl stirred with each step, catching sparks in the air, dragging whispers in her wake. Eyes followed her. Feet faltered. A baby began to cry. And then, the final drum. A deep, echoing strike meant to close the night. It rang out like a heartbreaking. A sound meant to declare life and joy and strength. But the moment it fell silent, something else rose up from the ground. It was a scream, but not human. Not entirely. Not from any throat. It rose not from lungs but from underneath. The earth itself screamed. It began as a low groan, vibrating through the soil beneath their feet, shaking the drums, sending ripples through bowls of water. Then it swelled, into a high, keening wail that cracked the air like lightning. People screamed in return, some collapsing, others clutching their ears. The sound came from everywhere, from the ground, the sky, the stones, the trees. The scream was not one voice, but thousands. Layered. Agonized. Ancient. Some villagers fell to their knees. Others tried to run but found their legs useless. The air shimmered as if heat had warped the world. Cracks split the packed dirt of the square, narrow at first, then wider, as if the land itself had opened its mouth. From deep within the forest, a soft glow began to rise. Far beyond the village edge, past the last fence and beyond the brambles, the ancient tree began to burn with light. Not flame, but something stranger, a pale, silver blue that pulsed from within its trunk, illuminating the roots as though alive. The leaves didn't rustle. The branches didn't move. But the entire forest bent slightly, like it was listening. Emily did not flinch. She stood at the center of the chaos, still and calm as people cried and begged and bled from their ears. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on the horizon, toward the tree glowing in the distant dark. One villager crawled toward her on hands and knees, his mouth open in horror. "What are you?" he gasped. "What have you done?" Emily turned her head slowly. And smiled. Not cruelly. Not kindly. Just truthfully. Then she turned and walked away. Her shawl trailed behind her like a shadow made of stars. And the scream, the one born from beneath the village, from beneath generations of cruelty and silence, continued long after she had gone. It began at dawn. The sky was still bruised with the fading colors of night, and a pale mist hung over the village fields like breath held too long. A child was the first to hear it, standing near the edge of the graveyard, where her grandfather had been buried only a season ago. She was picking wildflowers when she froze, her small face tilted toward the earth. From beneath the soil, a voice called her name. Not in malice. Not in welcome. But in terror. By the time she screamed and ran, others were already gathering at the graveyard's edge, drawn by a sound no one could explain. A low, constant moaning, like wind trapped under stone, rising from the cracks between graves. And within it, unmistakably, were voices. Familiar ones. Laughter warped into wailing. Chuckles echoing with regret. Giggles broken by gasps. It was not the dead who called. It was the living, their own voices, returned to them through the mouths of the ones they had buried. Manla's cousin dropped to his knees, clutching at a grave as his own laugh, the same one he had thrown at Emily months before, rose from the dirt like smoke. "Make it stop," he sobbed, scratching his ears. "I didn't mean it. I didn't know." All across the graveyard, stones cracked. Soil split. The dead did not rise, but the sound did. Screams too long buried clawed their way back up, not angry, not vengeful, just endless. A feedback loop of every laugh that had ever ignored pain, every voice that had ever mocked someone crying for help. Now reflected. Amplified. Reversed. In the village, people barricaded doors. They hid beneath mats and under prayer cloths. But nothing silenced the chorus of sound that drifted from the graves like fog. Every person who had once laughed at Emily's screams now heard their own voice crying for mercy from beneath their ancestors' bones. The wells bubbled without water. The air tasted of copper. Even the birds flew wide around the village. And Emily walked. Slowly, barefoot, her shawl dragging behind her like a banner of forgotten names. She moved past the graves, past the huts of those still living. No one dared stop her. No one spoke her name. The silence around her was thick, reverent, terrified. She walked to the forest again. The path no longer resisted her. The trees parted as if welcoming her return. The earth itself seemed to bend in her direction, drawing her inward. She did not tremble. She did not glance behind. The clearing was just as she'd left it, the ancient tree standing at its center, its twisted roots spread wide like fingers pressed into flesh. It no longer glowed, but there was something deeper pulsing beneath the bark, a rhythm, like breath or thunder waiting to break. Emily stepped close. She sank to her knees beside the roots, placing one palm on the bark. It was warm. Then she felt it, the sound. Not heard, but felt, humming through the ground, crawling up her spine. She whispered, though no sound came. A name. Her grandmother's. The bark shifted. A slit appeared near the base of the trunk, where roots overlapped. Carefully, Emily dug. She peeled away moss and soil, her fingers moving gently as if unwrapping cloth from a wound. There, beneath the bark, bones. Small and brittle. still wrapped in a strip of patterned cloth she knew better than any memory. Her grandmother's shawl. Or what was left of it. Emily wept without sound. And beside those bones, others. More fragments. Dozens. Too many. Some small. Some shattered. All piled in quiet mourning. The tree creaked. The earth shivered. You gave us your scream, the voices said, layered, familiar, everywhere. Now take your silence. Emily's breath caught. She rose slowly, her hands covered in dirt and bone dust. She opened her mouth. And for the first time in months, she spoke. But it was not the voice she had once owned. Her words poured out like wind slicing through hollow canyons. Her syllables cracked like thunder splitting mountains. Her vowels rumbled with the depth of rivers underground. It was not a human voice anymore. It was the voice of something remembered and reformed. It held pain. It held power. It held silence that had been weaponized, shaped into song. She did not speak long. Only a few words. But the forest heard. The tree bowed slightly, as though in recognition. Emily stepped away from the roots, leaving the bones untouched, letting them rest. The scream was no longer needed. The silence was no longer empty. She walked back through the forest, and as she passed, trees leaned toward her. Leaves curled upward. The dirt grew soft beneath her feet. And in the village, though no bell rang, people turned toward the forest as one, each feeling the shift in the air, the end of something old, the beginning of something else. A hush fell. The graves still echoed. But no longer with their laughter. Only with hers. By the time the third moon passed since the festival, the village had withered into something half alive. Where once smoke curled from every chimney and children ran between huts with sticky hands and loud laughter, now silence settled over the rooftops like ash. Chickens no longer clucked. Water pots cracked for no reason. Doors that had never creaked now screamed open like mouths in mourning. Of the dozens who had lived there, only a handful remained. Most had fled, into the hills, into madness, or into the earth. Some simply vanished, their huts found with untouched meals on the floor and windows flung open to the night. And then there was the chief. He no longer wore his headdress. The beads had broken weeks ago during one of his raving episodes, and he had never picked them up. His voice, once booming and proud, now rasped like dried leaves. He sat most days in the dirt outside his hut, his once proud robe stained with ash and mud. He was alone. His sons were gone. His council no longer came to sit with him. He had tried everything, offerings, prayers, sacrifices, even digging through old chants no one remembered. Nothing answered him. Nothing stopped the sound. Because now the sound came from below. Not footsteps. Not whispers. But laughter. And screams. From beneath the wells. From beneath the graves. From cracks in the earth that had never been there before. It was always the same, the laughter of the villagers themselves, their own voices, looped and distorted, tangled with screams they did not recognize. Some said the screams were ancient. Others said they belonged to the unborn. No one wanted to know for sure. Then, one morning, Emily came for the chief. She stood outside his hut, not speaking. Her face was calm, unreadable, framed by the folds of her grandmother's old shawl. Her feet were bare. The chief crawled out to meet her, falling to his knees, grasping at the hem of her wrap. "Please," he croaked. "Whatever I did, whatever we did, forgive it. Take this from us. Let me bury what's left of my people." Emily did not speak. She only turned, slowly, and began to walk. And he followed. They passed the burned-out festival drums, the cracked pottery, the abandoned cradles that swayed in the breeze though no child had touched them. No one tried to stop them. No one watched. Only the wind noticed, curling around their ankles as they walked to the edge of the forest. It opened for them. The trees parted like veils. The earth grew darker, quieter. The deeper they went, the colder it became, not from lack of sun, but from something older, something that remembered too well. They arrived at the clearing. The ancient tree pulsed faintly, its bark alive with veins of pale light. Its roots spread out like skeletal arms. The ground around it was scattered with faint indentations, not footprints, but echoes of where feet had once stood. The chief fell to his knees again. His body shook. "I beg you," he said, facing the tree. "I didn't know. I didn't know what we were doing. We thought it was just laughter. We didn't mean to break her." The tree made no sound. But the ground did. From beneath the roots, the earth moaned. A low, deep groan like something breathing after a long sleep. And then, arms. Not flesh. Not bone. But arms made of soil and rot and memory. They reached up, wrapping around the chief's limbs, gentle at first. He screamed. But not out of pain. Out of recognition. Because the scream he gave was one he had once laughed at. Emily stood back as the roots accepted him. The tree did not glow brighter. The forest did not shake. There was no flash of light. He simply disappeared. Pulled under. Consumed. And then silence. Emily stepped forward and pressed her palm to the tree. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, she stood like that, woman and tree, pain and promise. Then she turned back toward the village. In the days that followed, she walked the paths no one used anymore. She gathered stones. Dug shallow holes in the center of the square where the earth still held the memory of dancing feet and broken drums. Into each, she planted a seed. No one knew where the seeds came from. They were not fruit. Not grain. Just dark, vain things that looked like pieces of storm clouds hardened into shape. She watered them with the same clay bowl she used to feed her grandmother. Within a week, flowers bloomed. They were unlike anything the villagers had seen, tall, glass-petaled blooms that shimmered even in shadow. When the wind passed through them, they made no sound. But if you knelt beside them, if you dared press your ear close, you'd hear something faint and aching, a voice, a whisper, a word you thought forgotten. Emily never spoke again. She never needed to. Because when she walked, people listened. They listened to the silence she carried. To the memory of the scream that had changed them all. And when they drew water from the wells now, they did it gently. With reverence. Because the water sometimes laughed. And sometimes, it screamed. Years slipped by like soft rainfall over stone, smoothing the jagged edges of memory but never erasing them. The village stood smaller now, quieter, not from fear, but from a different kind of reverence. The drums were never played the same way again. Laughter still lived there, but it had softened. It bent its head before sorrow, and when someone screamed, whether in pain, grief, or terror, no one laughed. Children were taught early. Not just to listen, but to hear. Every scream tells a story, the elders would say. Not all wounds are visible. Not all voices are loud. Respect them. They spoke often of a girl who once screamed louder than the wind and was ignored. Who lost her voice, and in doing so, made others hear. Her name was etched into no stone, carved into no shrine, but it echoed in the way people paused before speaking, in how they gathered quietly when someone wept, in how even silence now had meaning. Near the old well where the chief once ruled, an elder woman often sat in the shade of a crooked tree. Her skin was dark and creased like bark, her eyes deep as rain pools. She said little, only ever offering soft smiles and soft bread to passing children. One day, a girl with wide eyes and wild hair sat beside her, clutching a reed whistle she had carved herself. "Grandmother," the child asked, "what's your name?" The woman turned, slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, not proudly, not sadly, but gently, and tapped her throat once with her fingers. She didn't speak. But the child nodded, as if she understood. They sat in silence together. The whistle never played. And as dusk rolled down from the hills, the wind picked up. It moved through the reeds and the trees, brushing the leaves and rooftops like an old hand across a scar. If you were quiet, truly quiet, and you let it fill your ears, you could still hear it, the scream. But it wasn't a scream of pain anymore. It was layered now, like thunder made of voices. It moved with the wind not as a warning, but as a reminder. It had power. It had weight. And it belonged to a girl who was once not heard, but who now would never be forgotten.